What's going on, Badger fans? We are going to continue talking about this staff. More thoughts on Greg Scruggs, the staff turnover. Plus, if we win 7 games next year, it hits the over? But is that a good thing? We're going to talk about that and more with a great guest on today's Locked On Badgers. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers. Thank you for making this your first listen every single day. Really do appreciate y'all. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today. You get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Let's just get into it. So we have Curtis Holland jumping on the show. Second or third time he's been on the show. Been on a bunch of lives. Curtis is awesome. I do want to give you a second, Curtis, because on the previous show you were on, someone reached out and said, hey, what is Curtis's connection to the program? Because he seems like there's something there. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to just speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, so thanks for having me again, Ryan. I've grown up a Badger fan. It's kind of in my blood. I went to university from 2010 to 2015. Took an extra senior year because I liked it so much. But I actually have a lot of family ties. My grandpa played football on the team from 59 to 62. He was on the Rose Bowl team in 62 that lost to USC. Which was up into, I believe, the Michigan-Texas game, considered to be the best Rose Bowl of all time. He actually had a touchdown called back in that game that would have been the difference. There was a holding call on a 30-yard run he had. So he's actually in the Hall of Fame there. I got to collect his medal, or I guess his reward because he passed away, unfortunately, in 2016 before he got inducted. My dad also played football at Wisconsin, 81 to 85. He played with Altoon. Played with a bunch of those guys back then. He played running back. My uncle played football, Tyler Holland, from 06 to 10 under Bielema. So I got to know a little bit more of the team, personally back then, and a lot more relationships with some of the coaching staff and people on the team back then. My grandpa's from Madison. He grew up in Madison his whole life on my mom's side, and he never played football at Wisconsin, but he played a lot of sports. He used to always tell me about when he was younger, they would sneak into the football games. They'd get 100 kids together, hop the fence, and it was like, they can't catch all of us back when you could do those kinds of things. Then my mom, she went to Wisconsin. A couple of my uncles on her side played hockey there. So I really grew up, with Madison as a second home, going up there, watching football games, a little bit more of a personal relationship with some of the previous coaches and staff because, my family knew them. And, I got to meet a lot of them and a lot of old players. And even now, my family's heavily involved in the school on the, alumni, donor side. So we have some relationships in there. And so, my whole life, it's kind of almost like, to me, the Wisconsin's kind of like family. Like it's a different kind of fandom. When Wisconsin struggles, I don't just go and look at a different team. It's kind of like, oh, I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. So it's just a different kind of relationship, I guess you could say.
Hey, let me ask you this. On your grandpa's touchdown run that was called back, is there a good film of the holding call? Was it a good call?
There's not, and I don't know. I've only seen bits and pieces of that, and they're probably somewhere in the archive somewhere. There's actually a full game film that we can look at. And when I really cared to try to find that information, it was back when it was almost impossible to find any kind of film on old games. But he's my grandpa. I run with that story. I think I think there's more proof to that than maybe the Wilt Chamberlain 100-point game. So we'll see what happens. But that's actually a good point. Now that you say that, I might look into that and see if I can find some.
Really quick,
probably the State Historical Society might have it. So next time I'm in Madison, I'll take a look.
It's got to be somewhere, man. And really quick, I want to finish up this because I think that's just an amazing connection to the program. What kind of back was your grandpa?
So he was a speed back. So he when he was in high school, he ran track, was really fast, and he went to Wisconsin. I forgot how many yards he had his senior year, but he was all Big Ten running back, and I know he ran track at Wisconsin too. He used to say he got invited to the U.S. Olympic trials. I don't know if he actually went to them. I don't know how far he get. I don't know if he was like on the first name cut off. He didn't make the Olympics, obviously, but that was more his thing. Was he was just really fast.
That's awesome, man. Let's talk about. You and I talk a lot kind of offline off the show about staff, about Grinch, about Scruggs, about the turnover. Is it an issue? Is it not an issue? I want to just start with Scruggs. I've talked about it a little bit on the show, but I wanted your perspective because I think one of the things you do really well, and it's really unique, is you care about the program, but you have a really recent approach to the way you look at things, the way you think about things. What was your first reaction when Scruggs went to Michigan?
Well, my first reaction was, dang, we lost another coach. But the reality of it is this, like, Scruggs, obviously, he was loyal to Fickell. And when he first got here, I'm thinking, okay, this is a guy that we're going to be able to build, a D-line around. We're going to be able to build some future with him. Really excited to have him. Obviously, he's going to be here for a while because the whole reason he came to Wisconsin was Fickell in the first place. And then you see, it looks looking like he's going to go to Michigan. Well, you dig a little bit deeper. He has actually deeper ties with Schroen more than he does with Luke Fickell, going back to his days at Louisville. So, it's like, okay, like that, it's like, hey, I'm working for my uncle, but then my dad calls, I want to work for him. Like, it's just, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I kind of get it. And then, you look at Michigan as a program. I'm not sure what Badger fans are on about Michigan and Wisconsin being on the same level. Like, that's never really been a thing to me. Like, I mean, football, if you just look at football records, we're 7-5 and trying to rebuild our program. Michigan just won a title. I mean, that's not comparable. And then you look at the school itself. Michigan is like Wisconsin, just kind of elevated at every level, from, academics to alumni to size to pretty much everything. Like, they just, and I hate to admit this as a Wisconsin fan, don't, you might want to actually cut this part out of the interview. But I mean, Michigan is just one of those programs that, like, they're one of the top programs in the country, and they're that way for a reason. And so it's tough for me to come on here and say, this is a lateral move for him. He's going to make more money. He's coaching with someone that, to him, he's got better relationships with, at a program that just won a title with a incredibly deep and talented D-line room. It's just tough for me to look at that and say, how could you, turn it down? I mean, it's just kind of it's just business at this point.
Well, and I also always look at assistant coaches. They're salesmen to some degree, right? They travel around the country and they have to sell their product, and their product being the university, their positional group. It's so much easier to sell Michigan than Wisconsin. Like that, there's a stress level to recruiting, I imagine, and you're recruiting against all these other schools. And that's not a knock on Wisconsin. It's so much easier to sell Michigan than 99% of Division I programs. I just think it's an easier job. Maybe there's certainly more pressure, I would think, because he's taking more money.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say it's easier. Because it, like, I think about, for example, I know more about, I'll just use a comparison of Ohio State, and this is partially why I love that Luke Fickell's from there. When Urban Meyer was coach, if you didn't get your recruits, I mean, the expectation was to land a top 5 recruiting class there. And if you didn't get that, you were on the chopping block, right? So it's a different kind of pressure, right? Like Wisconsin, we can go after top guys, but if we lose them, no one in the fans are upset, but no one's really like calling for a coach's head. We've grown up on, doing more with less and guys who weren't, highly rated and things like that. So that's not something we're, really worried about. But if you don't get top classes at, well, now more and more Michigan, but like, if you're at one of the top schools, you fail to land a top class. Like, we'll take Hitchler, for example. If he's at Alabama and doesn't land a top 5 safety, he's on the chopping block. I mean, you have to perform there and get top players like that. It's a different type of stress. And then on top of that, those teams expect championships at a higher level, unfortunately, than we do. And I think, it's just a different kind of difficult. So I wouldn't say it's easier. And quite frankly, if I'm a coach and he wants to go to an easier job, then I don't want him. So if that was his reasoning, then good. I'm glad he's gone, because that's not what I want from my coach. I want my coaches to be competitors, to want to have challenges and to want to overcome those challenges.
Yeah, no, that's certainly a good point. The pressure cooker there is going to be enormous, especially coming off that national title, and you have to replace one left. I want to shift over here. We got to take a quick break, but coming after the break, I want to talk about just the staff continuity in general. And if you think, how big of a deal do you think this is? And I really want your perspective on that coming up next on Locked On Badgers. But first, we're going to take a quick break for our friends of the show over at FanDuel. FanDuel remains the number one source for all your sports betting needs, the number one sports book that we go to for our betting needs on the Locked On Network. There's a reason why right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 for free when you place a $5 bet, win or lose, for new customers. Please do it responsibly as always, but is it a great place for futures, spreads, parlays, teasers, every single sport you can think of or want. Plus, the user interface is really fast. It's easy. It's simple. If you're not a gambling savant, you can still get in there, make your bets, get all your action really simply, easily. The payouts are fast and simple. It's not like some of those other sites that you've probably used in the past, and we're not going to mention them here, where when you win, it gets routed through like 3 different banks in different countries, and it's really hard to get your money. FanDuel is simple, easy, fast. They are the official sports betting partner of the NFL, of the NBA, and of the Locked On Network. Go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn, FanDuel.com/LockedOn today. Make every moment more. All right, let's get back with Curtis here. And one of the things we've talked about, and I think this is where maybe we've hit a bit of a disagreement at times, is I feel like this staff turnover hurts the program. And I'm not saying that you haven't said that, but how big of a deal is it to maybe lose 5 or 6 assistant coaches 1 year into Fickell's regime?
Obviously, that's not what you want. But when I look at the team, the thing that I think is the most important and the pieces that we kept are what matter more. We kept our OC, we kept our DC, we kept our head coach, right? And in that vein, when we bring in guys, the coaches we bring in are going to have to learn the way we do things. They're going to have to learn our signals. They're going to have to learn our play calls. They're going to have to learn our methods, right? Assistant coach isn't going to necessarily come in and be like, this is how I run, this is how the defensive line room is run. No, there's going to be some semblance of continuity in the sense that like there's an overall structure to how we want to structure our program, and you're going to have to fit in that because that's how we're running our team, and that comes from the top down. And so obviously it's not ideal. You have guys that are building relationships with the players that are now gone. You have guys that understand the players, their little intricacies and the different ways that you got to coach somebody or kind of what they're about. Maybe they have good relationships with some players or things like that. So obviously there's going to be some of that there. And then the recruiting piece, you lose the relationships that you pre-established over the last year or two, scouting different schools. And more importantly, you lose the relationships with different high school coaches because that's going to matter ultimately in the long run to getting into schools to see players. So obviously that's not great. But I think for me, the fact that we kept Fickell, the fact that we kept Longo, the fact that we kept Tressel ultimately tells me that it's going to be fine. That a lot of these coaching pieces, not that they're plug and play and not that it doesn't matter, but I think that the effect it will have on the team itself is vastly, vastly overstated.
Yeah, I wonder if, and I'm curious your take on this, because I know from a professional standpoint, we've talked about it. You work somewhat in the business of helping hiring manage talent as well. You always want people who are looking to grow and get better, right? Like you want talented individuals talented individuals eventually move on to bigger roles. Like that's part of life. But what's the balance, right? When you're hiring an assistant coach, because you also don't want a guy who's going to leave in a year. Like, how do you find that sweet spot to someone who's going to be around for a while, but someone who's also talented enough that the bigger schools is in a way, the fact that Michigan and Alabama have come in and taken people from your staff is a sign that you're hiring talented guys. But you got to find a way to get guys in the door for more than a year. What's the balance there? What's the sweet spot?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. I've never worked with a company in my life that hasn't said we want people for the long haul. That's every company ever. So the trouble is you don't really know. I mean, you screen guys, you can ask them questions. You can try to figure out what their motivations are, what's their core drivers, what's important to them, what are they trying to do, and you figure out how that aligns with what you're trying to do in your program, or in this case, your team, like what your vision for the future is. And where do they line up? And you try to do the best you can, and it takes a good evaluator of talent to really be able to tell, one, is this someone who's telling the truth? Is this someone who's being truthful? And, when they tell me, hey, I don't like to move around, I want to be in a place for a long time, are they serious about that? And there's questions you can ask, to kind of gauge how serious they are. But then it also takes a good leader to make people want to stay. I mean, the amount of times that we've hired people who are looking for a long-term fit, they get there and they're like, I hate it here. The leadership's terrible. Everything they said they lied about, like, this is not the place I want to be. You have to have a great leader in place too. And so I think Fickell is that. I think he's a great evaluator of talent. I think that he knows what to ask and what to look for. I think with this previous team, I think there's a number of circumstances that just kind of make this situation unique. One, it's the first year. It was a very stressful year. Wisconsin is not for everybody because, again, it's kind of like you got to do more with less. And I feel like Fickell, is down with that. I feel like Longo's down with that. I feel like, a good amount of the staff is committed to that, but maybe not everybody wants to do that. To your point about Scruggs earlier, maybe he wants to go to a place where there's, a deeper well to draw from. So, at the end of the day, I think it's figuring out, hey, okay, who's going to be with us for the long term, not just from the player side. I know we've had numerous conversations about players who, who's really committed. Well, it's the same thing with the coaches, like who's really really committed to building this, and so, again, I wouldn't put too much, fear into this. I don't think this is going to be something common every season. I also saw this on the Cover 3 podcast yesterday. I'm not sure if this is how accurate this is, but there's been more coaching movement this offseason, this cycle, than in like the last 20 years.
Right.
And I think I think just the fact that there's so many more jobs, and 3 of the top 4 college football teams all lost their head coaches. Like, it's there's just so much more movement that it's almost like there's just going to be more movement. So I think that's kind of an outlier too.
Well, and I think there's an element of bad luck to this too, right? Like you can ask, to your point, you can ask all the right questions. You can bring Greg Scruggs in and say, hey, we're looking for somebody who isn't going to jump right away. We're like, obviously, and then Michigan calls a year later. Well, I mean, I wasn't looking to jump, but Michigan, I can't turn it down, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I look at it like we've lost 4 coaches. I know people say 5. Gaduli doesn't count. He's as much a coach of, it'd be like me saying that the one guy that Alabama hired as their offensive coordinator was their offensive coordinator. He was never their offensive coordinator. He was going to Seattle. Like, Gaduli was never our tight ends coach, right? So for me, it's, I look at the 4 coaches we lost, right? 2 of them were one was, a removal. And in Luke Fickell's case, I'm glad he did that. That showed me, like, look, coach is going to make mistakes. Fickell's going to make mistakes. I know people were kind of mad at him, like, why'd he hire this guy? He didn't know he was going to have to fire him down the road. And he did. And as soon as it was known, he did it. And that's the thing you have to do. Like, you have to know that if your leaders see something wrong, they address it immediately, and he did. Right? So I'm glad about that. I think Blazek's a tremendous hire. I'm not going to say he's better yet. I don't know what he's going to do, but I feel like all signs are pointing that he's going to be a really good coach for us. So that's an upgrade. You look at Mike Brown, right? I can look at this as a lateral move. It seemed more like hey, look, if you're looking, it might be a good idea for you to look somewhere else. Like, I feel like that was the conversation that was had there. So that one, again, I don't feel terribly about losing him. And then you lose Hitchler and Scruggs to the 2 teams that probably would have won the title. If Bama won, they would have won the title. If, and Michigan won the title. So, it's tough to look at that situation and say, oh, Wisconsin's failing. Well, I mean, we hired good coaches. We did what we could. Not everybody, I think, was looking for, Wisconsin to be their long-term thing. And, it is what it is. I mean, it's just business at this point. And again, our key leaders are still in place. Our key structure is still in place. And it's unfortunate. It sucks. You lose some things with guys, but you also gain some things when you bring in other guys. And it's kind of like the transfer portal. You can always roll with the team you got, but if you have an opportunity to upgrade, that's also good too. So I feel like we've done a good job of identifying talent in the coaching sphere. And I think, again, it's tough to say. I don't want to say we hired upgrades. I don't want to jump ahead of our skis, but I do feel like the coaches we hired are great coaches and are going to do well for our team.
Yeah, I like the guys that I've brought in. I agree there. And I've also made the point that across the board, you may take a dip somewhere, but you're going to take gains somewhere else, right? Like, so maybe you don't like Trench as much as Hitchler for whatever reason. But I do love Blazek. I love Guyton. I think you took probably potentially steps up there. So it's always fluid. It's always moving. I do want to throw this question up here. We got a couple comments from people too. This one says, who cares? Speaking of the coaching moves, who cares? Look at Alabama's coaching turnover year after year through Saban's career. He had to replace most of his staff every single year. I don't think it's that big of a deal with positional coaches. The only pushback I would have here, Curtis, is if you're Nick Saban, you can literally pick whatever assistant coach you want. Like, it's easier to replace coaches when you're picking from Alabama's position. We've seen it, right? They just took Hitchler. They get a little easier job of replacing coaches, in my opinion, with the turnover.
Yeah, I'd be careful with that argument just because if you look last year, for example, Alabama tried to hire I don't know why I can't remember Washington's OC's name off the top of my head, but they tried to hire him. He turned it down. He tried to hire a couple other coaches. They turned him down. Saban was notoriously difficult to work for. He demanded excellence, and that's why they had excellence. But people hated working for him. I mean, this is not uncommon in the coaching sphere. Like, people, he was a tyrant at times. Right now, there's a reason that he was successful. I think there's an element that you have to be that, but it wasn't just like a set in stone that, like, if I want you, you're going to be hired here. On top of that, the thing that again kept Alabama together is the fact that it was the same program year in, year out. Coaches came and they learned Saban's methodology, not the other way around, right? And maybe they had, their offensive creative inputs. You can look at Lane Kiffin, or you can look at, what Sarkisian did. They obviously did a lot with the offenses there, and Saban didn't do a lot to coach them in terms of running our offense. But What he did do is say, hey, this is our terminology. This is how we're going to run the program. This is our standard of practice. This is how we do things, and just put your plays in there. And that was basically what it was. And so that's why, again, when I look at our team, one, Fickell's a great evaluator of talent. We see it with football players. We see it with the coaches that have been hired away and who's hired so far. There's no reason for me to believe he's not going to do that again. There's no reason for me to believe that. I know we were talking about all these position coaches are so great on the Discord, and it's like I made the comment that, well, Fickell's the key to this, and some people take issue with that, saying, hey, well, the position coaches matter too, and that's true, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but who's the one who puts that position coach there? If he's finding the guy who's got the talent, the qualities that a Hitzler has, you don't think he can't find that again? That's his literal job, and that's what he does. So like. That's why I'm not sitting here like whoever he hires there is going to have those skills because that's what he's looking for, right? So that's why I'm not as concerned with it, and I do believe that as long as the leadership's intact, as long as the vision's intact, we'll find a guy who fits that vision, and he'll match up just as well as our previous coaches did.
So I'm with you on Fickell. Like I think Fickell's the dude. I think he knows guys. I think he's well connected. I think he understands what he's looking for. I think he's a great coach. Like I'm beyond stoked still that he's Wisconsin's head guy. I will say every time you hire, and this, there's a risk, right? Like, so it's not a guarantee because you're good at finding talent that you're going to replace guys successfully. Excuse me. Like there is a bit of a risk there. And I also think it's a bit of an energy vacuum, right? If you're constantly having to replace guys, and to some degree, that's always going to happen in college football, right? Let's be realistic. But if you're constantly having to replace guys at this scale, then you're continuing to put energy into hiring and training guys in your system. To your point earlier, bringing them up to where you are. I think that takes more energy than you probably want them expending every year. But I don't think this year's going to be the norm either. I mean, at least that would be the hope.
Well, I think, if you're a good program, and I believe that we are, it's not an energy vacuum because you should prepare for it. You should go into each season expecting to lose coaches. And if you're not doing that, you're not doing your job, right? You're not prepared for, when I talk to managers, they have plans. They know that 20% of their workforce might not be there next year. They know that they're going to have to hire an X amount of people. They know that certain people are going to be coming back. They know how a lot of those people are going to perform. A lot of guys can write the performance review for next year for their employees before the year even happens. A lot of that stuff is so well known at that level that, you can almost write a book by it. And I think with Fickell, if I don't have a short list of coaches that I know are in my back pocket, that, hey, if I lose a coach, this is who I'm going to call. If Longo decides to be a head coach, this is who I'm going to call. If I lose my DC, this is who I'm going to call. If I lose a safeties guy, this is a guy that was a GA for us at Ohio State or, wherever that I think is going to be good. He's at D2 right now, could come up to D1. If I don't have a short list of that, I'm not doing my job, right? I'm not preparing for what I need to do. And the agents are making those phone calls. I just tell them who to call. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, it's like that's important to be prepared. And I guarantee you, while I don't think this is probably what Fickell intended, that he was definitely prepared. I mean, you don't just get Alex Grinch as a safeties coach, or a Blazek who none of us even knew who he was, or someone like that without having some type of idea as to who you're going after, right? So I think that to us, it's an energy vacuum because we don't know what's going on. We don't know who knows who. We don't know where we're at. I mean, they could already have a D-line coach basically hired right now. We don't know. We don't know. We're fans, right? So, I think that, it's an energy vacuum. It's something you got to do that you maybe could have used time doing somewhere else. But also, if you're good at your job, you should plan for this and you should have contingencies in place for when this happens.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And as per usual with you, it's really well said. I think probably splitting hairs a little bit, like you mentioned the 20%, I think it becomes difficult when you're replacing 40%, right? And again, to your point, 1 year does not make a trend. Right. This is the first year. I think there were some ill fits and I agree with your point on the decisiveness as well. You have to be able to pull the plug if it's not working. But that still means that offensive line coach was a bad hire. Then, like, both those things are true. We got to take one more quick break, even though I could talk about this the entire show with Curtis. I do want to come back and talk about the over-under with him as well. We got to take one more quick break for our friends of the show over at Gametime. Gametime is the number one source for all of your ticketing needs if you need to get to a Wisconsin game. And there are some doozies on next year's schedule that you're going to want to be at. Use Gametime to go get those tickets. Download the Gametime app. Use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. You're already getting the best prices with Gametime. Now you get another $20 off, and you don't have to go through crazy logistics to get the tickets, and you get pictures of the seats before you sit down. Plus, they have last-minute flash sales. Plus, they have every other type of entertainment venue you want, concerts, music, comedy, theater, Broadway, basketball, football, baseball, hockey, whatever you want. You can go to Gametime, elevate your entertainment game, get the tickets, save money, save logistics, save planning. It's all over there. Again, use code Locked On, download that Gametime app. You create your account, use the code Locked On for $20 off. It is the number one place to get all your sports entertainment, all your ticketing needs. Gametime, code Locked On, $20 off. All right, let's get Curtis back on here. So I talked about this on my show too earlier, but I wanted your take on this. Over under 6.5, Vegas said it. If the Badgers win 7 games next year, and I know it's hard to say because you mentioned it, we talked about this before the show, and we talked about this on a previous show as well. It kind of matters how you look, but is there any scenario where 7 wins is good next year?
Well, I would say 7 wins is not ideal. We don't want that. I know Fickell and staff doesn't want that. That's not going to look good on their, performance reviews from McIntosh. And, in terms of the Vegas line number, 6.5, I actually agree with the number in the sense that I can totally understand why Vegas has that number. I mean, we've lost to Iowa 3 of the last 4 years straight. And then, you look at the big teams on on the schedule, those are teams that over the last few years, we wouldn't really have a shot of beating. So I get the number. That said, if we win 7 games next year, how would it be a good outcome? I think if you look at it, if you look at some of the teams that, we're favored to beat off the get, if we smash them, like 50-10 or something like that, and then, maybe we lose one game, like, we go to Northwestern and lose that game because, it's Northwestern or whatever.
Yep.
But we come back, we beat Iowa, and then in each of the big games, we're right there. It's, we lose in overtime. It's competitive. We're toe and toe with Oregon, 35-34, Friday Night Lights, you get down to the 1 yard line, the clock expires, maybe we line up to kick versus Penn State and the ref calls the timeout and then we lose the game because time runs out, some Arizona State stuff. If stuff like that happens and it's very clear, like, hey, we belong to be there. We just got screwed by the refs, or, we're just one step short of where we really want to be. Then yeah, I think you can look back on that and say, hey, yeah, I mean, it's tough to have moral victories, but man, we were really good and we're right there. Give us another offseason, we're going to be winning those games. I think that could be construed positively. But if it's a lot like last year, where it's like, well, it looks like the team's uninspired half the time, or we still don't know what offense is for, half the season, and the defense is just letting people run by them, then I think there'll be some concerns, and I think there'll be some serious questions that need to be addressed going into Fickell's 3rd year. And so, we'll see. But I think the truth is probably somewhere in between that. I don't know I think we win more than 7. I think we're right around the 8 to 9 win range. And I think it will be more on the lines of, hey, you look really good. I think this team is improving. And I think there'll be a lot to look forward to in the following year.
I love that. I've said I think you need to win 8 games next year to get the fans feeling good about it. Because I think your scenario's correct. You could win 7 and look better in the big games. But if you win 7, that also does mean you lose every big game on the schedule.
Yeah.
Plus, it's like even if it's close, I feel like you got to knock off one of those tough games. Maybe you go one.
I'm not saying it's ideal. It's not. I mean, I know we'll be talking about going into the offseason. Can Fickell win a big game? That would be the conversations. And so I hope we don't get in that place. But I do feel that, I don't want to get ahead of myself on predicting next season, because the last couple of years, especially 2 or 3 years ago, I really thought, yeah, Wisconsin's going to go 10-2, 11-1. We're going to win the Big Ten West. Last year, I didn't really feel that way. I was hoping we would get around 9 wins, and I think we probably should have. But going into this season, I do feel like, at least 8 wins is sort of in the ballpark for us. I think that we will do a much better job of beating the teams that we're supposed to beat. And I think we're going to have a really good shot in a lot of those big games. I mean, the season actually sets up, with all the movement going on, the season sets up incredibly well for us. We get, an Alabama that's got to work in a new OC, a new ZC, a new coach. They lose a bunch of players. They still got great players, and DeBoer, I think, is a really good coach. I think he's going to do well down there. But I mean, look at where our offense was 3 games into the season. I mean, like we weren't ready to go. So I think they won't be really ready to go either. Jalen Milroe, I'm not know if I'm sold on him yet at Camp Randall at night. I mean, it's going to be an aggressive environment. Like, I think that's going to be a good game for us. And then, you look at USC. We play USC. They're coming off Michigan, right? Yeah. So they play at Michigan, they'll probably get their tails beaten, by a much more physical team than they are. And then they play us. And yeah, it's in Cali, but I mean, first of all, our team, like, we have a bunch of Cali athletes now. So it's like that, to me is like, I think they're going to be excited to play in that weather. They're going to be excited to play in that game. A lot more low stress environment. USC, the Coliseum's not like that. So
Yep.
I'm thinking that'll be a good game for us. I'm not convinced we'll have a defense ready to go by week 3. So we'll see. And Grinch will probably know some things about how that team works. I'm sure he'll be feeling some type of way in game planning. So yeah, I feel good about that game too. So
He's gonna have 17 tackles in that game. Like, I agree with you. Like, going to USC doesn't really scare me. Maybe it
yeah,
should. You're also replacing a quarterback. They have a lot of turnover on the coaching staff. That's not a home environment that's super rowdy and intimidating. Like, that doesn't. Oregon worries me. I think Bama still potentially could knock us around because they
yeah.
just have so much raw talent. But you're right. You're getting them at the best possible time to get them.
Yeah, this season sets up perfectly for us. I mean, we get Penn State and Oregon at home, so those are huge. I mean, obviously those are probably the two best teams I believe on our schedule this year. I'm not sold on Drew Lar, but I do like their offensive coordinator hire. I think that's a inspired hire by Franklin. But Penn State has never demonstrated under Franklin to be able to develop anybody. Everybody comes in at the exact same level. They lead that program, and that's why they've struggled to get over 10-2. They have a much more talented roster than Michigan, yet they got ran over 3 years straight. So, it's just one of those things where it's like Penn State. I have to see it to believe it. I think they're making moves to try to get better, and I think Franklin's addressing that. But we'll see what happens with them. And then Oregon, I think, is the best team on our schedule. I think they got a loaded roster. An experienced quarterback. They have defensive talent. D-line talent across the board. Great players. I think they got a lot of team speed. So that's a team that concerns me. But again, it's at home. It's late in the season. They're going to be beat up from their first ever Big Ten schedule. We get the best team that we're probably playing all year later in the season when we have more time to get our stuff together too. So we'll see. Again, I think that to your point, you do have to get to 8 wins. I'm not going to call 7 wins a victory, but I do believe there is a way that if we had 7 wins and it looks really good, that like at least you can go into the offseason feeling somewhat positive about it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Curtis, man, I love it. I could talk to you all day, man. We have to schedule another show coming up. We didn't even get into some of the predictions, but I got to cut it there. He is Curtis Holland, family connections to the program. And again, just someone who comes on with a really reasoned and intelligent way of looking at sports, which we appreciate. Curtis, man, thank you so much, as always.
Yeah, thank you.
On Wisconsin, and we will talk to you guys later today.